I will take up from where Gurumurthy ji let off on the issue of a national narrative. And I will make this presentation in the context of what I believe is an important requirement and for most of us to start thinking about, which is the need for a national economic narrative, which is almost a fundamental piece of what we call the national strategic narrative, or what has been referred to as the national strategic narrative. To this, let me just share one episode. In 2018, end of 2018, I was in a program in Singapore, and it was a program that was talking about China and India and etc. etc. And I was making this point that Asia has to be now seen as a bipolar Asia, with India rising, and it is no longer, in a sense, a continent where China's writ ran unfettered or unchallenged. In the evening post the seminar, I happened to, there's a usual dinner cocktail, and one of the leaders of, and I won't mention his name, but one of the leaders of one of the stronger, larger, more powerful economic nations in Asia, I was talking to him, and he said to me something which was very appropriate and got me thinking in 2018, which is that, look, India's strategic doctrine, India's desire to play a larger role in matters security in Asia and the world is coming through loud and clear after Prime Minister Modi has taken over. There is clearly a visible new strategic thinking and doctrine. But it is very important for India to also have a sound economic underpinning to that strategic doctrine, because finally, at the end of the day, to be a strong nation, you need to be strong economically strong nation. And I think that is an interesting point that he left in my mind. And then, of course, I worked for many months after that to present in the pre-COVID stages a roadmap for India to become a $5 trillion economy, etc., etc. But anyway, long story short, I think India needs a national economic narrative, a narrative that is, of course, based on its civilizational history, but is based on issues of entrepreneurship, prosperity, growth, ambition, things that seem to have been lost in the hazy mists of socialism for many, many decades. The world, as Gurumurthy ji said, the world respects power, the world respects economic power even more. And really, the strategic narrative or the strategic doctrine that India needs to be focused on is a doctrine that is a combination of, or is a sum of economic, security, technology, and trade. I will start with that point, and I will leave a second point for you to think about before I launch into my presentation, which is that the twin issues that the world is grappling with today, the two issues of terror and China, and I don't mean to equate China to terror, but terror and China are clearly the two big risks to a prosperous growth of the world. Both represent failure of the world policymakers. It represents significantly a failure of the US and the Western economic nations on how to look at the world from the 90s. And in part, it represents India's own failure of economic thinking and not creating a significant economic narrative that played or attracted Western capital and Western interests. Gurumurthy ji said one very interesting point, which I want to just leave behind. He talked about, I want to start with, he talked about this issue of rules of engagement of war, and how India was in many ways a country that believed in the rules, and therefore some nations took advantage of the fact that they necessarily didn't play by the rules. It is precisely that has been playing out in the economic world. The Western world invested heavily since the 90s in China, in this make believe world of my enemy's enemy is my friend, in the post Cold War era, and have now begun to realize that China, for all of its, playing victim for the bulk of the 90s and the 2000s, is really a country that does not share an interest or appetite in playing by the same rules that the Western world believes the countries of the world should play by. So with that as a backdrop and a strong, in a sense, urge or a strong push for a national economic narrative, let me just give you what is my thinking on the COVID and the post-COVID India. I've titled this presentation Expand and Thrive Through New Economic Thinking. And I'm making two separate points here, given the backdrop that I just mentioned. One is that India has to expand and thrive. That is one point. And we have to do so not with the same old economic thinking and, let us say, straitjacketed view of the world, but through really a new economic framework. Quick background, I think we are all quite aware that the COVID has been a global it was a global pandemic. The question is still out there about who exported it, how did it get created, where did it originate. So we will leave that for the moment. But it is important that we understand that it has created a significant economic shock through the world. The world's biggest consuming nations and the world's biggest investing nations have all been significantly hit by the COVID pandemic, starting from early March to now. I'll make the other point that it is clear at the very beginning of the pandemic, and many thinkers articulated this, that this was not something that was going to be solved. This is not going to be addressed by conventional economic theories. This needed serious out of the box thinking, and there was an immediate need to protect the economy, protect people's livelihoods, protect enterprises, and then look at the future as the COVID pandemic receded. This is a slide that I have put up earlier as well, and I will just explain this to you. One second. This is the chronology of the shock. We were an economy slowing, moving into the COVID. The COVID shock that started in March, and we have just bottomed out, I believe, in August, September, and the growth has. We are getting back to pre-COVID levels of growth. So there are three stages really, which is the soft landing stage, which is done, the rebuild and reaccelerate stage, which has been helped by the various packages that the government has pumped into the economy, and we are now looking into the future horizon of how do we expand and thrive. This slide is deliberately titled "Economic Storm is Over," which is a fact that is borne out by the September GST collection, and this is the best high-speed indicator, high-frequency indicator to tell you where the economy is vis-a-vis where we were in April. As you see, we were in April 2020 compared to April 2019. This represents a serious economic contraction due to the lockdown, which was absolutely necessary for our healthcare system to get some breathing room and build capacity, to where we are today, which is we are for the first time in September in excess of 2019 GST collection. So it is a safe assumption to say that the economic storm is over, barring, as everybody who wants a disclosure and disclaimer says, barring any other severe lockdown event that is forced on us due to a second surge, which I believe is highly unlikely. Again, I'll just quickly take you through some numbers that proves that the economic storm is over. While the pandemic continues and the healthcare numbers continue to show the growth of those infected, the fatality rates are declining, and it broadly indicates that while the pandemic issues will not get resolved till the vaccine, the basic issues of fatality, treatment, healthcare, the government and the various stakeholders are very much in control. Again, these are numbers that show, these are high frequency indicators that show where we are vis-a-vis pre-COVID levels. All of them, whether you look at power demand, whether you look at workplace activity, e-way bills, which is transportation, grocery activity, all of them point to a steady and systematic growth back from when the lockdown was lifted in June to now in September. Again, UPI transactions, digital transactions, grocery activities, IMPS. So that those slides were just to make the point that the economic storm is over, and we are now really in the in a situation at a point where we need to discuss how do we grow back, how do we expand. At this stage, it's important to do an assessment of what did that economic storm entail, what was the damage that was created to the economy, how much of it was permanent, how much of it was temporal and can be regained. The basic assessments now point to about a 10% hit on the GDP for the year, which is about 20 to 23 lakh crores. That is going to be the quantum of it. If you look at the 4 quarters, negative 23.9 for Q1, probably about negative 8 to 9 for Q2, flat Q3, and a probable marginal positive for Q4. It leaves us with a minus 10% for the year, and the share of the loss, if you, and this is an interesting concept, who is bearing the share of this 23 lakh crores loss? It is through some recent studies, it is clear that the governments, both state and center, will be bearing 50% of the loss. The individuals, and in individuals, it is clear that it is in the informal sector, it is the informal enterprises, the informal workers, the urban worker, they are going to be bearing the brunt of the 25% loss of that 20 lakh crores. And of course, enterprises, medium to large, are going to bear the other 25%. It is also clear that businesses and people will need help. I'm making this broad point. I will not get into too much of details on this. This impact of the shock on government, on enterprises, and on individuals, if left unaddressed, represent potential risk to the long term. Just to give you an example, if enterprises remain hurt and don't grow back slowly and systematically, lower retained earnings means weak future investment. So there is almost a direct correlation to helping these three segments of the economy to how we expand and grow in the future. Let's just step back and understand what this is mean. I mean, we have all gone through a very difficult 5 months, depending on where you are. If you're a businessman, if you're in the government trying to manage expenditure, or if you're an employee and managing your livelihood, everybody has gone through a serious shock and serious pain in the last 5 months. What does this really mean for people who are looking at the national economy as a whole? Think of this as a natural calamity. I mean, this is the best way that I have found to explain this to people who want to understand what the COVID means to us. The COVID is like an unprecedented natural calamity and has a consequent shock to the economy and livelihoods. Now, usually when we read about a drought or a flood in, let's say, part of Karnataka or a part of Uttar Pradesh, it is a natural calamity, and the rest of the country comes in with an NDRF or a national disaster relief fund. The central government steps in and helps that particular region out. But in this particular case, this is the whole nation and indeed the whole world that has gone through this natural calamity. So nobody is in a position to help anybody, and it is for governments of India, the government of India, and the state governments that have to adjust to this revenue loss, foregone almost permanently, that have to work together to address this calamity. It is clear that informal enterprises, informal workers, and the urban poor have been the worst hit. Enterprises have suffered deep losses. And the bottom line is that the resources are needed as a nation to address the losses from the shock, number one, and also to finance the investments for the economic expansion. We cannot afford to stay where we are and hope that organically we will grow at the rate we are growing, and that will be enough to help address the shock and help address the future growth requirements. Why is expansion and thriving and growth post COVID almost certainly essential? Why is it absolutely necessary? Debt sustainability is an important issue. That post COVID, the government of India would be at almost 80% debt to GDP, And the only way for economy to address that kind of debt is to grow. So growth on us is not an academic conversation. Growth is an absolute necessity, even if you look at it from a pure debt sustainability point of view. We need stability in the external account. We need confidence to the rating agencies. And most importantly, as to pick up from where Gurumurthy ji just spoke, we need a new national economic narrative, given all of what is happening in the world. And these resources and this new economic model can be built on these 3 points that I'm making in the other part of the slide, which is we need more support for the informal and the urban poor sectors. It is absolutely clear to prevent further social let's say social lack of social cohesion and social unrest. We need to step up and help more the informal and urban sectors. The government has already done a significant job in the first 5 months, but we need to do more. The financial sector must expand for our GDP to expand, and we need to kickstart the national infrastructure pipeline. And I suspect the consumer confidence will restart and the consumer spending part of the economy will restart once there is more visibility of the vaccine. Again, I'm repeating the same point, essentially, that individuals, the larger role for the government in the post-COVID world is that they have to take care of individuals, they have to build the national infrastructure and expand the financial sector. I say this again, not to be alarmist, but it is a statement of fact. And in a sense, it is a continuation of what Gurumurthy ji was saying, which is that we have to look at the COVID and the post-COVID world as almost, saying three things. Yes, it is a once in a lifetime crisis. Yes, it is a challenge to rebuild the economy and address the shock of the COVID, but it is also a once in a lifetime opportunity to expand the economy beyond the crisis. And I will explain that to you in a bit. But the underlying point is that in the short term, it is the government that will have to do most of the heavy lifting to drive this strategy. I like to put this in red so that it is understood by everybody that there should be no sort of lack of clarity or ambiguity about the fact that the government is the real entity left functioning today. And for the next 2 to 3 years, the role of the government in addressing the shock to the economy and to expand the economy will be significant. Now, again, I think, and I said in the beginning that a lot of our problems in the economy, even pre-COVID, were a result of our lack of a national economic narrative or a national economic doctrine. And for many, many years, we were floating between this socialism, misguided socialism, and a very ambiguous definition of reforms, which almost always meant FDI, FDI, FDI. Reforms was always about FDI. And it did not talk about any broader definition of what our economic strategy was. And I think there is a real need for now an economic vision, an economic narrative, which is built on building India in this new world to be a country that is supremely confident about its place in the global community of nations, as well as it is able to address prosperity and progress to many of its citizens that currently lack. I'll make this point that economic theories, conventional economic theories cannot deal with this economic storm or the post-COVID world. We have at the VICES studied every crisis from 1934's Great Depression to the most recent lost decade of India, as Gurumurthy ji calls it, the 10 years of the UPA. We've studied the Southeast Asian crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, the many other crises in the US and Europe, and the 90s economic crisis in India. One of the realities is that every crisis has resulted in new economic theories and thinking. No economic crisis was solved by conventional economic thinking. And every stage, the conventional economic theories were set aside and new economic thinking, new economic models, and new economic visions grew. That is the time for India. This is the time for us to come up with a absolutely strong economic narrative that is going to guide us for the next decade or two. There is a clear emerging view that India has the potential to greatly benefit by global developments. I don't need to go into this further. I think everybody understands that and everybody agrees to that. And I will make this point that, and repeat the point that the theories that have arrested us to the past, and I mean economic past, must give way to the realities opening up in terms of opportunities. Geopolitics shifts are inevitable. I think the VIF has done many seminars that have pointed to this. Gurumurthy ji has spoken about this. The Prime Minister has spoken about this. Many people have spoken about this. But it is important to understand the backdrop to this. This problem that we face today, and I said this at the opening, it is ironic. And then I was recently in another seminar with some with some members of the Quad, and they were all beating up on China. And I said, finally, somebody must raise the hand and say it is really the Western world that is responsible for China's growth since the 90s. It is ironic that the Western world supported a communist country pretending to have free markets rather than a true democracy like India because of its perceived socialism. And this support to China was because of the Cold War, because my enemy's enemy is my friend, and the US-Russia Cold War basically benefited China the most. Multilateral trade agreements, and I go back to what Gurumurthy ji said, the whole world naively has signed up to the WTO thinking that this is going to be, trade by rules. Whereas it is now being dominated, and world trade is being dominated, and world economy is being dominated by one country, China, that is the haziest and the least transparent about the rules and its conduct. And so, therefore, the real risk today to the future of manufacturing, technology, security is real. These are real risks. And therefore, the world is seeking more dependable, more trustworthy partners in trade, economy, technology, and trade, economy, and technology and security. So this India has, and I think we should all be agreed, India has a historic and unprecedented opportunity, number one, and India needs to have a new compelling economic narrative, or a clear compelling economic narrative. I just want to share this slide with you. This is a pre-COVID assessment of how the world's economic power is going to shift. This is pre-COVID. In 2017, we were number 7. We are number 6 now. And it predicted that by 2030, which is 1 decade from now, China would be number 2. And then 2 decades from then, China would be number 1. And then slip back to number 2 after the US woke up. And this is the conventional thinking pre-COVID. And I think there is an opportunity for India to change this stack up. If it's expected that India will be number 4 by another decade. That is something we can aim for, but I think we can strive to do better if we have this economic narrative and economic strategy in place. And it is from there that I bring you into this point that the next decade, the 2021 to 2031, could be the decade of this new economic narrative, which the government and the Prime Minister has called the Atmanirbhar Bharat. And we can describe that Atmanirbhar Bharat as this new narrative, which is described by these 4 sentences. We will invest to protect and grow our economy. We will reform and modernize our government and economy. We will develop our own economic model, and we will achieve this Atmanirbhar Bharat using the spirit and hard work of its people and finance it through the natural resources and wealth that this nation has. Each of these statements have meaning on their own. The 4th one is, while it may look very political to you, it essentially means no more crony capitalism. This is about creating opportunity for as large a group of entrepreneurs as possibly can, and have this growth be driven by the energy, entrepreneurship, enterprise of thousands of businesses and enterprises rather than a few businesses and a few families. So it comes back finally, okay, fine, I made the case that there needs to be an economic narrative, there needs to be a new dynamic for growth, but where is the money going to come from? And that is going to be the key. We have some ideas, and I will not put all the specific ideas out here, but the point is clear that the government will need to raise more resources credibly. These are challenging times. We need out of the box solutions. Both the government of India and the state governments have to adjust to revenue loss. And I say this because there is a narrative today that somehow the state governments are immune from the COVID shock, and the central government needs to raise all the resources and keep pumping into the state government, and the state government should continue to operate as if it's business as usual, without repurposing expenditure, without reducing expenditure. That is unfortunately not a credible argument, and therefore it is clear that this loss and this shock has to be borne by both the state and the central government. But I will leave one thought behind in the topic of resource mobilization. Both the state and the central governments own large amounts of assets that must be used to finance the rebuilding of our economy and creating jobs for our people. To give you a very macro, sort of a graphical description of what needs to be this Atmanirbhar Bharat strategy. So there is, as I mentioned, this government spending box. It has to finance the informal and the urban poor. It has to finance and pump in money into a national infrastructure pipeline for an infrastructure build. It has to expand the financial sector, which would in turn kickstart domestic private investments. We need massive FDI into infrastructure and manufacturing. And there are other resource mobilization options by the government and by the government repurposing government expenditure. And I mean repurposing government expenditure to imply that cut wasteful government expenditure, make government's expenditure focused on either social security and welfare spending and or investment into infra, and we need to be able to trim out all of the other wasteful expenditure. This will create an economic model that is, of course, going to create its own dynamics of consumption, but will also have a significant power of exports in both manufacturing and services. So, just to summarize, my contention here is that as we recover from the COVID and as the government creates this resource mobilization roadmap, the government spending, and as the government is going to be the most important entity for the next 2 to 3 years, should be focused on kickstarting this massive spend on the national infrastructure pipeline, financing government programs and support for the informal sector and the urban poor. This is absolutely critical because they continue to be very vulnerable, and every study shows that they are the ones that are continuing to bear the burden of this COVID-19 shock. Of course, the expansion of the financial sector, our financial sector continues to be amongst the smallest as a percentage of GDP to all the comparable economies in our region and the world. I would, everybody has a tendency to look at spending as the only way of restarting the economy. But I say that this slide and the previous slide are almost joined at the hip, that government must spend more, but the government spending must be also accompanied by government strategic structural reforms and repurposing expenditure. And the reasons for that are very clear. The sovereign debt to GDP levels have become high because of the reduced revenues to the government. So repurposing government expenditure a must. Structural growth and strategic reforms are absolutely credible to ensure growth and debt sustainability, for the government debt sustainability to growth in the private sector. Ease of investing in businesses infrastructure. If the national infrastructure pipeline is going to be the catalyst to kickstart, as it was in the US in the early 30s and the mid 30s, the there are significant amount of reforms required in infrastructure, how infrastructure projects are conceived, how these PPPs are regulated, how it is easy for investors to invest and exit from these projects. There's considerable amount of work to be done there in the government to make it easy and attractive for capital to flow in, and ease of investment in manufacturing as supply chains diversify from China. Already the government of India and state governments are responding to this, and you can see that there's already early success on this. I have made an earlier presentation to the VIF listing out a comprehensive list of reforms, and I will not go back into discussing that today, but there are many, many ideas of structural reforms that the government can and, in my opinion, must do to ensure sustainable growth. I will just briefly touch. India is not a poor country. I think this is a misnomer. We have tremendous amount of assets, minerals, land, equities that both state governments, central government has. There are many ways of raising money. Some Guru Murthy ji has championed himself and have proposed. There are many ways. Resources, in my opinion, can be raised, but it's a question of applying the resources and backing them with the required structural reforms. I will end by saying this new economic narrative, this almost required economic narrative is the narrative of Atmanirbhar Bharat. We can make it a gateway to a decade of growth. And we have to tell ourselves this today, that it is a time to have out-of-the-box ideas. We need to budget for this contingency. We need to finance this contingency of the COVID. We need to finance the growth of the economy beyond. It is a once-in-a-lifetime challenge to rebuild the economy, but it's also a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to expand beyond the crisis in a sustainable, irreversible way. Thank you, and that's all I had to say in my presentation, and I'm quite happy to discuss this further.
Thank you, Rajiv ji, for that stimulating talk. I think you have underlined the importance for developing an economic narrative, and I have also gone into some detail as to what could be the components of such a narrative. And this complements the earlier suggestion that we should have a national narrative which has many other components of. I think there's already a number of questions addressed to you. So maybe we could start right away. So there is this question from Ambassador Anil Tugunayat, who wants a clarification. Is the interest rate mechanism the best way to recharge consumption and economy, which the RBI seems to be doing? And also, how different is our economic strategy from those of other countries? Maybe you could take this and we'll come to the other questions.
No, I think the RBI strategy of managing interest rates and yields on bonds is primarily aimed at keeping the financial system and the financial sector in an orderly situation. Their main objective is to ensure there is no volatility in the financial sector, that the interest rate mechanism moves in an orderly mechanism. In terms of consumer spending, my view on that is, and it's not a very unique nuclear science view, but it's a view that is born on common sense, that full-blown consumer spending is less to do with interest rates and more to do with consumer confidence about the pandemic. So as the pandemic risk starts receding, so it's an inverse correlation between the pandemic risk and consumer confidence. Think of it that way. So that is why in my presentation I said, I don't make the case that consumer confidence is going to come roaring back in a hurry, especially for discretionary spending. As the vaccine and the visibility of the vaccine becomes clearer and more visible, I think consumer confidence and therefore the discretionary spending, non-discretionary spending will pick up. And it is really less to do with RBI and more to do with consumer confidence. Consumer spending is linked to consumer confidence. In terms of how the countries around us are doing, I think ours is a very different situation from, let's say, the US or UK or indeed Japan, where for them, creating spending is more to do with printing currency, monetization in that sense. We have to be a lot more careful in out of control printing of currency and just going crazy, because we have downside inflation risk, we have an external account risk, even though in short term it may not seem very risky because of the moderate fuel prices and we have a balance of payment surplus. But the fact is that our strategy has to be very, very different. Our strategy has to be keeping in mind our desire to have an Indian economic model that is sustainable for the next 10 years. That we create growth, not just for the next 6 months, but the growth for the next decade. So this has to be very carefully thought through, very calibrated in its design, and very carefully executed and rolled out with the right capabilities and capacities in the government as well.
Thank you. We have another question, and that is about whether the growth is possible without the involvement of the private sector and the debureaucratization of the economy.
No, look, I have a healthy respect for bureaucrats, and so I will not suggest debureaucratizing anything in India. But I think it is clear, and I made this point in the presentation, that we need an out-of-the-box view to economic thinking. This is something I have, in the CES, me and Gurumurthy ji have discussed multiple times. So what that means is conventional bureaucratic thinking of economic management is not what we need. And I'm not saying that means we should debureaucratize the government, but we should clearly debureaucratize economic thinking. We should debureaucratize this new economic narrative. This new economic narrative, this strategic economic narrative, has to be a narrative that is built on what are the core capabilities and strengths of India today. What are the core capabilities or strengths of India that we need a decade from now? And the fact that we want to be, and this is a stated goal for most of us, that we want to be a significant player economically, we want to be a significant player in world trade, and we want to be a significant player as a democracy, as an open society. We want to be significantly influencing the outcome of the future of technology. And of course, security, of course. So in a lot of ways, Dr. Gupta, my answer is, it is not about debureaucratizing government, it is debureaucratizing economic thinking and rebureaucratizing the bureaucrats to this new economic thinking.
Right. There's also another question from Amrita. Can we practically make a new model that's outside of existing framework of free markets and state intervention?
No, I think Amrita, you didn't get the point in my presentation. I am actually arguing that if for the next 2 to 3 years, the government of India has to play a much more important role that was ever envisaged in the last 3 decades. That growth in the next 3 years and the basic foundations of the growth for the next decade will be laid by the government spending. And private spending will be an add-on in the first 2-3 years. And then, of course, it will kickstart as more and more FDI and more capital becomes available to private sector. But I am making the fundamental point, and that is the core of this presentation, that the government cannot be a bystander. Government is the active participant and almost the only participant in the overall scheme of things in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of expanding the economy.
The next question from Dinesh Singh. What do you think about the diminishing role of the international agencies like the UN, WTO, etc. at present? Will it hamper our strategy for economic growth?
No, I think the WTO is, and I'm assuming he's talking about WTO. I think a lot of us have very different views on the WTO. The WTO, in my opinion, as Gurumurthy ji said in his original presentation, was supposed to be a nice, orderly group of nations coming together, the developed and the developing, where there would be progress and development that will flow to the less developed nations over a period of time through open trade and open economic relationships, multilateral economic relationship. But what has happened is absolutely the inverse. So the dominance of the Western world on the world economy has now been replaced by a dominance of China to a large extent on trade and economy. So that was never the intended outcome of WTO, as I understand it, and as many people understand it. So it is time, in my opinion, for either deep reforms within the WTO, or failing which, as some people in the US have argued, that we must look for more bilateral, more negotiated bilateral, multilateral trade agreements rather than use the WTO. So this, in my opinion, is one of the challenges for the world to resolve. But to continue the WTO as is, in my opinion, is unsustainable and really, frankly, not right.
Okay. The other question, next question, which sector should India focus on to boost economic growth? Another question, how international strategic relations benefit us more than they take the benefit from us?
So, which sectors will grow? I think I have made in my presentation very clearly that the two areas that we must focus on very clearly are national infrastructure pipeline, which is 100 lakh crores of projects of building that clearly from every economic thinker or economic thesis creates downstream effects on jobs and economic growth. So the national infrastructure pipeline, with the government investing in it, FDI coming into it, sovereign wealth funds coming into it, is clearly a number one priority for us. Second should be, in my opinion, is the manufacturing area, where we must significantly attract the diversification of the China-based supply chain to India. So these two, I would argue, are strong. And a few months ago, when I presented in the VIF, I had made a case that our services exports is another area that we can really significantly grow as the world looks for more reliable and more trusted providers of services. So, I mean, that would be a separate conversation. I mean, if what areas we should focus on and why we should focus on these areas. But infra, manufacturing, services, these three areas significantly will help India play a big role in the overall world economy if we get it right over the next 10 years. In terms of our geopolitical strategies, and that goes back to what Gurumurthy ji said in the beginning and what many of you have said, that at the end of the day, we have to be confident enough to have an economic vision that helps us and in the process helps the world. Because a strong India, an economically strong India, a prosperous India is something that has a significant benefit to the equilibrium of the world because of our civilizational ethos, from basically our thinking and our democracy. So I think it, and I made this point in my presentation, I mean, that we are as much to blame as the world for allowing the rise, almost unchallenged rise of China over the last 3 decades. It is pair pe kuladi marna. We did a fairly effective job of holding ourselves back, not presenting ourselves to the world as what we are, which is really free market democracy, and allowing China to run away with this narrative, despite the fact that it is anything but a democracy and it is anything but a free market. They've attracted billions and trillions of dollars of capital and investments and are where they are. It is now time for India to do this. It is time for India. And fortunately for us, the global changes are going to be a tailwind for us.
There's an interesting question, the next one from Prerna. India is getting left behind in the standards setting and standards discourse. How can we be more active in that? And another question I think you could take together, how can India prevent brain drain as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat program? I think these are very important questions because India might be a late entrant into this technology game because of this standards and such issues?
So let me take the second one first, and I am a person who I spent a lot of my life in Silicon Valley. I came back to India as well in the 90s. Why do people come back? Why do people go, and why do people come back? People go because they think there is not enough opportunity. People come back when they see there is opportunity. In my opinion, India has now significant opportunity, but that opportunity should be tapped or catalyzed into creating intellectual property and sustainable products and services in India is an important part of our economic narrative. That should be an economic part of our economic narrative. And I say this because of the following reason. In 2008, 2007, 2008, in Bengaluru, there was a case that I exposed, in a sense, I was a part of exposing, where DRDO scientists, some DRDO scientists, were moonlighting for a Chinese technology company as consultants and advisors. So it is not like India does not have capabilities, India does not have the mental horsepower, skill set, or innovation leaders. What India did not have for many years is the narrative that there will be India based ecosystems that will help these innovators show their mettle, show their capabilities. And I'll link this to the last point that I want to make in this context. When Manohar Parrikar was defense minister, he launched something called the Make in India for MSMEs. And I remember the first Aero India that I went to post this government, and I went to an Aero India when Manohar Parrikar was unwell. And in that Aero India, an American government bureaucrat walked up and said, I have been coming to every Aero in India for the last decade. And this is the first time I am seeing so many Indian MSMEs showing their technologies and capabilities. So nothing is automatic, Arvind. We need to create an ecosystem where an Indian can find Indian entrepreneurs, Indian technologists can find ways to demonstrate their skills and innovation and raise the capital for the same. We have progressed significantly in my opinion, in the last 3-4 years, but there's a lot more to go. And if we have this economic narrative of Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is about an India that will showcase the best in case in technology and innovation to the rest of the world, and we back that up with policy making capital, I think we can do significant, and we don't need to worry about brain drain. We will have foreigners coming here and looking for work.
This question about standards.
Look, I can only say this, that I think intellectual property standards, all of these were in India, the discourse was being driven by foreign companies, people coming in with investment, and it was never really never central to our economic discourse. And I'm hoping that as economy and an economic narrative becomes central to our strategic doctrine, strategic thinking, that a lot of these things that we took for granted or were by the sidelines will become core. I'm not denying that these things were, let's say, less than central to our economic thinking in the past, but I hope that will change.
I think one more question before I come to Mr. Satish Chandra. And this is where does the unorganized sector fit into your economic narrative?
Unorganized, you mean?
Unorganized, yeah.
No, so if you look at what I said, it is clear that of the 100% hit today in the economy in the COVID, 25% of this is on the informal enterprise, the urban worker, which we call Shramiks, and the informal sector. They have taken a significant part of the hit, and they don't have traditionally savings to dip into, etc., etc. So, I have said that the government must step up and have one more package for that, and this is my argument. The second is this issue of formalizing the informal sector is something that commenced in 2015 with the Mudra loan campaign, which is because they were denied to organize capital all these years. The informal sector just was there as a statistic, but was really outside our economic planning and economic thinking. So I would argue that it is already part of our economic thinking. But this new economic narrative, this new economic doctrine, this new economic strategy must significantly have a place for the informal sector, informal enterprises, and give them a steady, non-disruptive roadmap to formalizing, incentive to formalizing, through both access to capital, through access to other social security norms, that social security packages that are otherwise available to formal sectors like provident fund, etc., etc., etc. So the nutshell, in my opinion, I did not put the actual doctrine in this presentation, and I think that is a subject matter for probably another discussion with many people in the VIF. But that the informal sector and informal enterprises would find place in this national economic doctrine or strategy is absolutely, in my opinion, inarguable.
Thank you. Now I request Ambassador Satish Chandra to make his comments.
Very much. Arvind, am I audible?
Yes,
we can hear you.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Firstly, Dr. Chandrasekhar, many thanks for that extremely instructive expose and address. I would agree with almost everything you said, in particular, the exceptional opportunity that is today before us to really renew India and make it into an economic powerhouse. Second, that the government's role is indeed critical, as you said. It will have to play the key role next 2-3 years. That's essential. That it has the resources in the country. We are not a poor country. What you said, divestment of assets, etc. There are many of them that can be done and will provide the stuff. The fact that the China Frankenstein was in fact created by the West, and particularly the US, happily, there is now clear recognition in the US that it is they who have created this Frankenstein, and the US is taking certain steps. But really what I wanted to flag, particularly for your consideration, is that we need to, and I'm sure you must be looking at this, and we must do that in terms of relocation of industry, located currently in China to India, which is our ambition and hope, we need to do much, much more for ease of doing business in India. And the specifics are something that we need to work upon as to how that is done. I understand from friends in the US who are in big business that really India isn't there yet. And we have problems. So Rajiv, my request is, please look into this. The second point is corruption. And you mentioned raising resources, etc. In every walk of life, everyone, including all of us, in interactions with government departments at local levels even, there is graft. And I think when you talk of repurposing government, etc., I think this should be an essential element of how we do that, because that will also help. Removal of corruption is an enormously important factor in making India into an economic powerhouse. And finally, you spoke of bureaucratization and so on. All of us are really afraid to interact with bureaucracy because things don't get done. And that is what, when we speak of bureaucracy in a pejorative sense, I myself was a bureaucrat. Actually, it is right, because it is the deadening hand which is there, which is a problem. I wanted to leave these thoughts with you, Rajiv, because I know you're working on it. And I think these are some things that you need to look into and come out with ideas as to how government can improve this. Because if this is done, it will add immeasurably to our economic growth. Thank you.
Yes.
Ambassador, I'll just quickly respond to you. If you look at my presentation, I said ease of doing, ease of investing in infrastructure, and ease of investing in manufacturing. I clearly recognize, and I have been an entrepreneur. I have invested in things that are very non-trivial. I invested in the first cargo train in India, and I can assure you, we are very, very, very far away from making it easy for the sovereign wealth funds to invest in ports or bridges or railways or railroads or all that. There's a lot of work to be done in making it easy for people with the checkbooks to actually write the checks. It's always easier to make a presentation, but when you want people to actually make the investments, they ask a lot of much more specific questions. Same true for manufacturing. I think yes, there is some incremental moves on the PLI scheme. The Apple supply chain is moving. Some of the other supply chain is moving. But the real test will be for us, for example, if we can get semiconductor manufacturers to move here. The real capability driven manufacturing, employment driven manufacturing that can move here. So I completely accept your contention that this is something that needs to be gone into detail and not just have a slogan. On the issue of corruption, Ambassador, I think the corruption that we have today, that we need to address as a nation, not we as in this group alone, is really the state government, the second and the third levels of democracy, the state and the local body. There it is a bit out of control. The constitution is silent. The 74th Amendment is silent on local bodies. And the biggest billionaires now, the biggest political entrepreneurs are no longer just MPs, they are MLAs and they are corporators. I know corporators who are much more well off than even MLAs. So it is an area that needs focus. But having said that, I don't think this is a conditioned precedent. And I said this in my presentation, that there are structural reforms that need to happen parallelly. It is not like China does not have corruption. China has corruption. China has significant corruption. China has significant rent seeking. But not that I say corruption is acceptable, but I suspect that is a process of reforms that we need to initiate parallel to this economic expansion. And it is not A depends on B kind of a approach to it. That's my view.
I wonder whether Professor Vaidyanathan would like to make some comments, having listened to this.
No. It's okay. Because, because my comments will be 1 hour at least. Because the premise itself, I do not agree that it is having a V-shaped recovery and other thing. We are in severe, deep crisis. That's something which we should recognize. And one positive thing could be agriculture. That's the one which could help us. 4.5% it is growing, and agriculture related fertilizer as well as tractors and other things are showing some signs. My hunch is agriculture is going to be the major engine of growth for India in the next couple of years. Second point is about, there is a huge, there is a triangle: defense, foreign affairs, economy, and finance. This is a triangle, defense and the apex you can call. There is a huge amount of silos in this. So recently only I find foreign affairs having some sort of a linkages with defense. Economy and this finance are totally separate from these two activities. Unless and until we bring together these three into a common dabba or common thing, because on one side we talk about our civilizational ethos, other side there is no congruence. I think that is the second point I would like to make. Third is, the discretionary spending is relatively very small in India. We are on this left side of the Engels curve. Roughly 50-55% goes for food items, milk, vegetable, and eggs, whereas only 15% goes for those items in Europe and US. So our discretionary spending is relatively much less, and the fundamental problem is the problem of 20 to 30% cut in the salaries of people, and large number of small businesses are closed down. I'm sure Rajiv will know about it. There is a recent article in an area called Koramangala, which used to be the pin code for what you may loosely call huge amount of new enterprises. They surveyed and found 167 entities are closed. And the to-let boards are phenomenally high. You know, I think we are just somewhere. Massive crisis is being faced in the country today. And I don't, you know, they are telling the Reserve Bank of India officially has announced 10.5 minus is going to be our growth rate for this year. I don't understand because they are telling green shoots and agriculture is growing at 4.5 plus. That means the industry and the services are going to do really badly. So, you know, we are not, I don't see any, you know, shoots or anything. We are not out of the thing. We are at a extraordinarily deep crisis. And the demand has to pick up mean something drastic has to be done by government. One, massive reduction in personal taxation. The middle class is suffering like anything. People don't understand. EMIs are not being able to be paid. 30% cut in most of the companies in pay and perks. And 25 to 30% of employees have been asked to go. And chota businesses are worst affected. None seems to care about them. And FIA and FDI is not going to help them.
Yes.
You know, anyhow, I don't want to appear as extraordinarily pessimistic, but we are in real deep pit.
Okay. So Rajiv ji, would you like to?
No. I don't think Dr. Vaidyanathan, you're being pessimistic or optimistic. There is not very different. What you're saying is not very different from what I'm saying.
Yeah, he said
I'm
that.
saying today that there is a 10 lakh minus 10%. There's a contraction on the GDP, which is 23 lakh crores. Maybe I did not emote it, but it is a significant contraction. And it is basically taken our GDP back 3 years. It is like 3 years of progress means nothing. So we have degrown by 10%. I can assure you that the 10% degrowth is hurting. And as I said in the presentation, Dr. Vaidyanathan, I said that it is hurting most of all the informal enterprise, the urban worker, and the informal worker. 25% of that 20 lakh crore hit. The estimates are 25% of the 20 lakh crore hit is 10 lakh crores is on is 5 lakh crore is being borne by the informal segment. And that is not a small thing. I'll just finish. The second thing, this thing about V curve, Dr. Vaidyanathan, I think we must be careful how you describe a V curve and what I am saying about V curve. The V curve is how organically the economy is rebounding post the lockdown. The point I'm making is that when the lockdown got the economy down to, let us say, 45, 50% of where it was pre-COVID, once the lockdown has been released, not accounting for the damage caused by the lockdown, the economy has gone organically back up to almost 100%. Number one. Number two, however, this is very important, and I think you're making this point. The mix of the economy that is now at 100% is not the same as the mix of the economy pre-COVID. There are many parts of the economy today that are performing at 120, 130% of pre-COVID levels. For example, technology, telecom, they are all doing much more. E-commerce doing much more. The number hides the fact that there are many that are now performing at 45, 50, 0%. I agree with you. And precisely why...
No, the main point, Rajiv ji, is we are not thinking of, we are telling about increased revenue, increased tax. We are not thinking of reducing the government. 50% of the government ministries can be closed. You tell me one good reason why Padma, Shri and other things should be given by government?
No. So
a huge amount of sifars and other things.
Yeah.
Except 4 or 5 ministries, all other ministries can be closed.
That's quite
And you know how
revolutionary.
much it will save? I'm telling you, the
No.
government is the single largest spender.
I think
How
the
much
government
it will
seems to
save,
be.
you know? Massively it will save.
No,
Okay.
No one is laughing at anything.
Okay. I think
Government, don't worry.
let Rajiv
I-
Chandrasekhar ji.
nobody is discussing this.
no,
I've
Dr.
been
No,
Vaidyanathan,
I
writing
think
letters,
he
I've
did
been-
discuss. He did discuss that.
Dr.
But
Vaidyanathan,
now I think
Dr.
we'll have to close it, and Rajiv ji, you can wrap it up also now. I think.
Okay.
Dr. Vaidyanathan, I want to make this point very clearly so that we are all on the same page. I think we are all more or less aligned into what we want the country to become and where we want the country to go. It is absolutely clear that the share of this COVID-19 economic hit has to be borne by state governments as well. There are a large number of state governments who are pretending that they should be entitled to GST compensation and it should be business as usual. And if you see what the government has done, they have done exactly the right thing. They have told the state government, if you want to spend more, you borrow more, which means it is the market that will respond to whether they can borrow or not. It is clear in my mind, and I made this in the slide, it is absolutely important that the government of India and state governments have to repurpose expenditure. I use the phrase repurpose as a way of describing exactly what your sentiments are. I don't want to shut down government, but I definitely believe that the government's one naya, if the government has 1 rupee, 50 paise of that should go to protect the poor, 50 paise of that should go to investment into infrastructure. This is my thesis, and this is my contention. And it should not go to line anybody's pocket or retirement fund, as the case may be. So I don't think we are at all at odds on what we want. Maybe your speed of what you want is slightly faster than mine, but I am unfortunately a member of parliament, and therefore I am restricted in terms of my speed. I thank Dr. Gupta. Thank you for the time, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Not the speed terminology. You are talking, I am talking about reduction in government expenditure. You are telling about refocusing because you are an MP. And maybe tomorrow you may be a minister. But I am just a retired professor. So
I think you should become a minister and implement this program.
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thank you, Gurumurthy ji.
Thank you. Thank you.